Welcome to historic Dayton, Nevada. We're the site of Nevada's first gold discovery and the first community, and we are also rich in other history. Come on, let's go take a look.
Here at the Dayton Museum, we've tried to cover all aspects of Dayton's history. And so here in the yard, we have a collection of agricultural, Chinese, mining, all different aspects of Dayton's history. This is a dump cart that we're going to restore. It's from the Chinese era and the construction. The Chinese were brought into Dayton for construction crews. At one time, actually, Dayton was named Chinatown. And so moving on, we can move up to our Italian heritage. This is a wine vat from the Italian era. Later on in the 1880s, lots of Italians moved in. The wine vat was a communal wine vat. They brought wine or grapes in from the Napa Valley, and this was the crushing vat that they used. As we move on here, we have our collection of outhouses. We have 3-holers, 2-holers, anything that you can imagine here. We don't want our heritage to die, and this was an important aspect of the early day living here. Here we have some of our farming equipment. This is a Jackson fork used for stacking hay with a derrick and stacking in a barn. The pipes that we have here, these are wooden water pipes. Dayton's original water system was all wooden pipes. We have representation of the different types of pipe that was used here in the water system. And the stones here are from arrastras. That was our Spanish influence here. The early days of milling the ore and processing, it was all ground by horse dragging stones around in a stone trough and reducing the ore so that they could put mercury in and collect the gold. And so these are arrastra stones. We have here a road grader, the early road grader. This is called a tailboard scraper. It's used for fine grading for fields and roads. We have our Fresno, which is used for moving dirt and digging ditches, all horse-drawn equipment. Okay, this is a building we call John Dee's shop. It was a barn that was here in Dayton since the mid-1800s, and we moved it in here. And the reason we came up with the name of John Dee's shop was that John D. Winters, his grandfather was one of the 4 people who, with Comstock, who discovered the gold at Virginia City and eventually became the Bonanza up at Virginia City. They're a very rich ranching family. John D. owned 2 ranches here in Dayton, and after he died, we went to his widow and we asked if all of the material that had been passed down from the Comstock era that was collection in his shop, if we could put it on display here. She ended up donating it, and so we are going to have a walk-through display where we have literally thousands of agricultural and mining artifacts that will be there for people just to walk through and look on their own. And so this is going to be one of our major displays here at rather than just the museum building. This is actually a wagon that was built here in Dayton. It was built at the Rock Point Mill just outside Dayton. They had their own blacksmith shop and wagon shop. The wagon was built actually as an ore wagon to haul ore from the Comstock down to Dayton. However, it's been converted to a ranch wagon, and it was probably used by the woodcutters as well to haul wood out of the pine nuts down to Dayton, and then later used as a hay wagon on the ranches. So this old wagon needs an awful lot of work, but one of these days we'll get around to it. It was built in Dayton, and we intend to restore it and bring it back to its original glory one of these days.
As we enter the museum, we are in the original schoolhouse that was built in 1865. It's also the oldest existing schoolhouse in the state of Nevada. This first display we call Dayton, where it all began. It actually depicts the first tools that were used in the first gold discovery in the state of Nevada. Okay, go ahead. One of the things I find really interesting here is that hat. And that was really one of the first miners' hats, because if you were to touch that, it's hard. And they used some type of a wax or something on top of it to make it hard like a miner's hat. Another interesting thing I find about this display is John Orr's Nugget in 1850. He came through with a wagon train of Mormons on their way to California, and he found this gold nugget, which is 1 1/4 inches in length and 7/8 of an inch wide, and it weighs 19.4 grams. And at the time of this discovery, it was worth $8.25, and that was quite a fortune in those days. This exhibit also contains a bread pan, and you would think of that as something that you would bake bread in. But when Abner Blackburn, who discovered the very first gold in the canyon in 1849, he discovered it with using just a knife, a butcher knife, and what he called a bread pan. And I pictured the kind of bread pan that we use today, but this is what he used for his gold pan. The site of the first gold discovery was about a 1/4 mile behind the Dayton Museum here up at the mouth of Gold Canyon. And today, if you were to hike up into that canyon, what I love about it is the fact that you can still see the rock, the overburden that they moved in order to get down to the bedrock to find the first gold, because it was placer gold mining, and it was fine particles. It wasn't usually a nugget like John Orr found.
This is our Native American display, and it's an example of what our philosophy here at the museum, and that is that the artifacts and the displays aren't as important as the information that is behind the artifacts and the display. So here with our American Indian display, we try to tell a story that this was a contact zone between the Northern Paiute, the Shoshone, and the Washoe Indians, and there was a lot of conflict in this area. Food supply in the Pine Nut Range to the south of us, southeast, west of us, was the mainstay for the winter food supply for all of these Indians, and there was quite a lot of armed conflict. And we have a skull that has an arrowhead in the forehead as an example of that conflict. We have other artifacts here that display 11,000 years of contact and at different periods, and each of the different point styles that are represented here represent a different time period. We have those laid out and on display as to the dates of that, so that people can learn to identify things that they find on their own out here. And we try with all of our displays here to tell a story, and that's what's most important.
This section of the museum is the Chinese section, and the Chinese were very instrumental in the development of early day Dayton. One of my favorite items in our Chinese display is the Chinese underjacket, and the Chinese jacket is one of the most rare garments in Nevada history, and it was found next door in a house in the bottom of a well that was inside the house. And it is amazing to look at it. You see the little tiny hand stitching and the little tiny brass buttons, and it's just an amazing garment and part of our Chinese history. These photos tell the Chinese history when they were in Dayton. They were brought here in 1857 to dig a water ditch from the mouth of the canyon to the west of Dayton from the river, and to bring water to Gold Canyon, where the miners would run dry in the summer. And so they came here, they formed a community, and were very influential in our town life. And this is my very favorite part of our cultural history, is the Chinese. And I've been to China and I love it. And as a matter of fact, at one time, Dayton was even called Chinatown, and it was the first Chinatown in the state of Nevada.
And this is one of my favorite sections of the Dayton Museum, and it's dedicated to the extensive history of mining and milling, which is actually the basis of all of Dayton's history. One of the engineering marvels of the 19th century was conceived by Adolf Sutro in a plan to drain excess water out of the Comstock mines, as well as increase ventilation for the workers. He conceived the plan to build a 3.8-mile tunnel all the way to Virginia City. In order to speed up the drilling, he created 4 vertical shafts that allowed him to drill in other different directions. At each one of the shafts, there was a hoisting works, a boarding house with complete staff for meals, and also the workers did not have to return to the town of Sutro, which he had created at the portal to the tunnel. It took about 9 years to complete, and was the drainage, everything worked very well, but he, realizing that it was not going to be as successful as he had originally anticipated, he sold out his interests and moved to San Francisco, where he created another entire part of his history. Within the Dayton Museum, we have an extensive display of miniature mining apparatus depicting each of the types of machinery that was used. Mining at that time of the Comstock was extremely labor intensive, and over the period of time they developed different techniques for milling and for mining. In addition to that, we have an actual display of working real-life tools that the miners would have been using, both hard rock underground and the placer mining segments. Milling was also, actually for Dayton, was more important than the mining. Most of the ore and all was discovered further up the canyon by the time of Gold Hill and Silver City and Virginia City. Dayton was known mostly because of the water. The milling were down here all along the Carson River. Much of the ore from the Comstock had to be hauled down here to be processed. One of the engineering marvels of the 19th century was the Sutro Tunnel, conceived by Adolf Sutro to drain the water out of the Comstock mines, as well as add additional ventilation to the workers to lower the operating temperatures. Although it was an engineering marvel, it was not a commercial success due to political and financial opposition from the railroad and some of the people in Virginia City. So as an attempt to speed up the drilling of the tunnel, Adolf Sutro drilled 4 vertical shafts trying to connect with the tunnel so that he could drill in 4 different directions. Although the concept was good, it didn't quite work. The tunnel ended up being 3.8 miles long at a cost of $3.5 million, and it took approximately 9 years to complete. Realizing at the end that it was not going to work or be as successful as he had hoped, Adolf Sutro sold out his interest and moved on to San Francisco. One of the engineering marvels of the 19th century was conceived by Adolf Sutro in a plan to drain excess water out of the Comstock mines, as well as increase ventilation for the workers. He conceived the plan to build a 3.8-mile tunnel all the way to Virginia City. In order to speed up the drilling, he created 4 vertical shafts that allowed him to drill in other different directions. At each one of the shafts, there was a hoisting works, a boarding house with complete staff for meals, and also the workers did not have to return to the town of Sutro, which he had created at the portal to the tunnel. It took about 9 years to complete, and was the drainage, everything worked very well, but he, realizing that it was not going to be as successful as he had originally anticipated, he sold out his interests and moved to San Francisco, where he created another entire part of his history. The Randall family was one of the early settlers in the Dayton Valley. They settled in 1880 and were involved primarily in ranching on the other side of the Carson River, where the Dayton Valley golf course is today. From 1882 to 1936, one of the Randall men was always the Lyon County Sheriff, and many of them were involved in other aspects of life in town as county assessor and a commissioner. Many of these items in the museum today were kindly donated from the Randall family. This room contains many of the artifacts donated to us by the Randall family, a longtime prominent family in Dayton. The wall on the side there contains paintings that were created by 3 different generations of the family, from the 1860s and 70s through to the one done in about 1913. There's an extensive dollhouse collection in here depicting several homes and stores and all that were in Dayton. Plus we have an extensive amount of their furniture, dishes, jewelry, all types of things that they've been kind enough to provide the museum over the years.
The making of the Misfits in Dayton took about 3 months, and it was a wonderful time and a good experience in the lives of all the Dayton people. Some of the more interesting things that happened when the Misfits was filmed here in Dayton with Clark Gable, Marilyn Monroe, and Montgomery Clift was the building of a rodeo grounds not far from the museum. It was over on Pike Street, and they had an actual rodeo there where they rode horses, and Marilyn Monroe sat in the audiences. There were times when they fell into the street, the front street of Dayton, and she hugged Clark Gable there, and quite an emotional scene. And here were more of the rodeo grounds.